When was the moment you realized that the person you were dating was an absolute idiot? Story 1. I thought he was joking about being a flat earther. He really was, and he was deep into it. Didn't know how deep until one of my friends pretended to believe the earth was flat, and my ex unloaded all his knowledge upon him. That was such a fun night at the bar. Answer: the worst. I had this experience with a guy who'd asked me out a couple times IRL. Kept asking why I was single while venting about his dating app experiences. And once I responded with something like, "Your stories are scary enough, haha. I haven't been ready to try the apps because I'm not used to the idea of meeting up with a virtual stranger who might be a murderer, or even worse, a flat earther." Bad joke, but he responded in a funny way, and we had enough in common that I soon figured I'd give it a try. It took a while, relatively speaking, for his true colors to appear, but when they did, hoo boy. Believed in all that after all, admitted his certainty that being gay is a choice. I later even learned he'd lied about playing the same instrument as me and having the same favorite movies because he'd overheard me talking about those things with others. I suppose in the end, the idiocy was mixed with a high creep factor, and I'm amazed to this day that he hit it so well at first. Story 2. The lake that he grew up on and learned to skate on apparently freezes from the bottom first, and then the ice flips over and floats to the top. Dude was a semi-pro hockey player. Also, birds don't fly at night. If you see a bird at night, it's a bat. Story 3. We were playing Trivial Pursuit with friends, and this question came up. What is the capital of Pennsylvania? I knew my GF had it in the bag. PA was her home state, and it's where we were playing. She said with confidence, New York. I chimed in, "Oh, no, that's okay. You obviously didn't hear the question. The question is, what's the capital of PA?" She said, "Yay, it's New York." I was totally dumbfounded. Answer: not my SO, but the guy who's now my BL. We played Trivial Pursuit, and he had 2 zingers in one game. To the question, what continent is Mexico on? He answered South America because it's south of America. And to some type of question about the name of the farthest point in a planet's orbit, he said Maximus Anus with an unparalleled confidence. Story 4. He mentioned a friend of his got offered a teaching job in Korea. I borrowed a Bill Bryson line and said north or south. He texted the friend to ask, then said south. Apparently North Korea is some kind of military dictatorship. Then claimed I was the ridiculous one for expecting a middle-class dude with a university degree to be aware Korea was divided. Answer: I worked with a guy who was a compulsive liar. One time he told me he'd been to every part of Asia except South Korea. I asked, "You mean North Korea?" And he replied, "No, South. I've been to North Korea." Then he asked me why I was giving him that look. I started keeping a notepad file on my computer of the random shoot he lied about. Edit: I know it's not impossible to visit North Korea in 2012, but that guy was known for lying about dumb shoot. Story 5. I worked for many years as a laser physicist. A newish boyfriend asked where the word laser came from. I told him it was an acronym from the words light amplification by the stimulated emission of radiation. He didn't believe me. He Googled it and declared Google to be wrong when it gave him the same answer. I showed him a pre-internet textbook that said exactly the same thing. Grudgingly, he accepted it. He also didn't believe that lasers predated the ubiquity of the internet. He checked Google and immediately declared Google wrong because it disagreed with him again. That level of stubborn stupidity was too much to bear. Answer: this has nothing to do with your story, but my middle school science teacher was a very smart physicist and could have easily been a top research scientist if he wanted to, but was very open with his classes that he felt it far more important to nurture the love of science for children. Anyway, he happened to be involved with the folks who pioneered building the Maser and later the first laser, and I was absolutely fascinated by lasers as a kid and would talk endlessly about them. My teacher asked me if I would be interested in meeting Charles Towns, who developed the Maser, at an event at Clemson University, and to ask my parents to let me come. We got there and I was so blown away at how smart everyone was, from the college students to the speakers. My teacher introduced me to Charles Towns and Theodore Maiman, and it was just freaking amazing. Thanks for dredging up this memory. I really miss those days. Thanks, Mr. G. You were an awesome teacher and a very kind man. Story 6. He wanted to try heroin and thought I was being unsupportive when I said that was the dumbest idea. There was no recreational substance use in the relationship, so that suggestion was a sharp left. He was a rich kid who wanted to know what it was like to be poor. What an idiot. Answer: yeah, I knew a guy who did substances and lamented how movies like Trainspotting and Requiem for a Dream make substances seem so good and seemed to blame that in part for his addiction. I watched those fudge movies and no, they don't. They show horrible things and sure as hell didn't make me want to try heroin. He was also rich and now he's dead, the dumb fudge. Story 7. He told me that he didn't know the difference between the written words do and when to use which spelling. He argued it was okay, though, because nobody knows. His supervisor at a government agency asked him to check his grammar before sending emails, and he was highly offended. Story 8. I got a letter in the email a few months ago stating I owed $53 in child support and to call to pay immediately. It was addressed to first name, middle name, first name. I told my girlfriend to throw it out. Started getting weird identity theft triggers. HR told me someone opened up an unemployment claim in my name. Trying to trace it down, girlfriend told me it couldn't be the child support letter because she called the number on the letter and gave them all my information to clear up the misunderstanding. Story 9. He was American military. I'm British. We got into an argument because he said USA was the only country that had been actually attacked in WW2. Pearl Harbor. We in the UK hadn't actually faced any hardship during the war. Neither had any civilians in Europe. It was just the soldiers on the front lines. Never heard of any cities or anywhere getting bombed. Nothing about the Blitz. He claimed to be a WW2 expert. Story 10. Went on a number of dates with a woman. Every other conversation held with her was fun and engaging, so things were going smoothly. On the last date, which number 2 came up and she said, "It's just so sad about how all the Jewish people ended up dying, even though the whole world fought to protect them." I asked for further clarification since I wasn't quite sure I understood what she meant by that statement. "Oh, did you not know all the Jews are extinct? That's how World War II ended. Hitler found the last Jew and eliminated them all." She was dead serious. No amount of other facts would convince her. It was enlightening to say the least. Story 11. She decided to fix a plug socket and didn't even turn the power off. Luckily, I walked in as she was just about to put the screwdriver into the back box. She got mad at me for stopping her and showed she really had zero concept of electricity at all. Edit due to comments below. This was a nice meaty UK 230 Vise. Story 12. His car engine was making awful noise. I told him to oil change. He said no, he just had one 2 years ago. Dude does $150K a year with the car. He says the sound stops when he revs up on the highway. I told him to stop doing that, but I guess his girls know nothing about cars, right? Edit, IDK, the English words, but he did bring it to repair when it sounded like a helicopter coming for 3 months. Knockenwell was ripping off motor. It took down 3 cm of the motor cuff. The mechanic was baffled. I offered to help find him a reputable mechanic, but he refused, saying he doesn't trust anyone out there. Story 13. On our second and final date, when I asked him when he'd last been tested for STDs, and he said he'd never been tested because he'd only ever been in monogamous relationships. Later, he casually admitted that he'd slept with someone the day before our date. This was fine. We weren't exclusive, and we also weren't sleeping together. But his claims of monogamy just fell flat. Anyway, he was in his 40s and an oncologist. Story 14. When she told me that the $3,000 the local council gave her to relocate got blown on worthless shite and partying and not furniture for her next living space like they intended. And then in the next sentence asked me what I was earning before stating she'd never worked a day in her life. Nope. Answer. Dumped an ex for something similar. We were both starving college students, 18, 19 years old. I was on scholarship working 2 jobs and taking as many courses as possible, while he was living off of loans and didn't work, taking 1-2 classes at a time. He got kicked out of his student housing because he didn't pay his fees. So I agreed to let him temporarily stay with me in my apartment with my tons and tons of roommates, because the roommates were understanding and nobody wanted him to be homeless. Super nice guy. But one night we had a deep conversation about childhood that really threw me off. He was on the verge of tears talking about how hard his childhood was, growing up poor and seeing his single mom struggle to pay the minimal bills. How he was going to break the poverty cycle and do something different with his life so he would never have to struggle again. I mentioned that one of my jobs was hiring, and he could walk in the next day and get steady work with flexible hours that worked around a university schedule. And he scoffed and looked at me like I was insane, and he was insulted at the idea of getting a job. He then talked about his brilliant idea to apply for a need-based loan meant to buy textbooks and pay for emergency housing for students who were in crisis. I was enthusiastic about the idea and that it would be amazingly helpful for him so he could get a stable place to live, besides staying with me in my crowded share house and paying no rent, and be able to get back on track to graduate. He laughed in my face, said he had already been granted the loan money and that he spent it all on a new gaming system, clothes, a watch, and some cosmetic shoot for his car. Because after a childhood of not getting fancy things, he felt he deserved to have those things. And it was more important than paying me and my roommates back or getting his life in order. He already had a recent game system and nice clothes, BTW. His mom shared the same sentiment that luxuries and name brands were more important than paying rent, or utilities or buying food. Broke up with him over text the next day once he left my apartment and had my roommates help him get his stuff out. I spent the next couple months paying my roommates back for what his portion of the bills should have been while he stayed with us. But it was well worth it to be free of someone who was always going to make bad choices and mooch off of everyone. Story 15. Her. When Jesus returns to earth, there won't be any more mountains. Me. What do you mean by that? Her. Well, Pastor said that when Jesus returns to earth, all of our mountains will come down. Me. That's not what he meant. Her. Yes, it is. He said it's in the Bible. Me. It's a metaphor for the world's problems like hunger, poverty, war, etc. If he literally flattened all the mountains, we would all die. Her. You just think that because you're atheist. Me. Broke up after her a few weeks later. Story 16. This was a first and last date, but she said that she loves reading, and I asked what types of books she likes to read. She said bibliographies. I said, so a book about other books? She replies, no, it's a book about someone's life. I also like books people write about their own lives, autobibliographies. Have you really never heard of a bibliography? With a roll of the eyes, could have been a silly mistake, but I had to say something. She proceeded to argue with me for probably 10 minutes, even after I tried to laugh it off and change the subject. At some point, I asked her to take out her phone and Google it, and she did. After that, she straight up refused to speak to me for the rest of the meal. We did not stay for dessert. Answer. My wife often mixes up words like this. She is super smart, though. I just repeat the correct word in my reply. Like, oh yeah, biographies can really give you a different perspective on things or whatever. Fun story, when I first met her, I corrected her on something trivial, and she just thought I was a pompous male body part. I'm still a male body part, but I just correct her differently now, lol. Story 17. He vehemently tried to tell me I was wrong, and the saying wasn't diamond in the rough, but rather diamond in the Roth. I asked him what he thought a Roth was, and this dumb MFer described a desert mirage. I said, okay, even if that is what it is, explain to me how it makes the saying make sense. He got really mad. That was one of many factual misunderstandings from that dumbass, but it's the one my sister and I laugh about to this day. After I broke up with him, a friend told me he proposed to another girl with the ring I gave back, but she broke up with him because he got a stripper pregnant while they were engaged. Hope you're continuing to live the life you deserve, Jonathan. Story 18. My husband asked the doctor, can he take our newborn home? I was still in recovery asleep, not yet met my baby, just had a 12-hour terrible labor. Son nearly died, followed by emergency Caesar. My mom and the doctor just looked at him and said nothing. Eat it. I should have said ex-husband. I left him 9 months later. Story 19. I had an argument with my ex because she was convinced that my house had propane, not natural gas. I had lived in the house for 5 years at that point, and she had moved in about a year prior to this argument. I printed out the PGE statement, and she insisted they were incorrectly charging us for natural gas because we were on propane. I asked her to show me where our propane tank was. I lived there for 4 years longer than her at that point, and I've never seen it. Obviously, having never had it filled, otherwise I'd know where it was. Took her outside and showed her the gas meter and where it came from and where the gas line was routed out to the street. She swore up and down that the line went to the propane tank that was buried underground like the septic is. Not sure what I saw in her in hindsight. Story 20. When he said his mother kissed him on the mouth when she had a cold sore, to intentionally give him oral herpes so he could never get herpes down there. That was when I realized both him and his mother were idiots. He had been 16, believed it until he was in his 40s. Yes, I got checked. Story 21. She nearly kicked a cat and threw a shoe at it because it was meowing like crazy out of hunger. It was her kitten, and she'd had it for 2 weeks. I swear to God, something died in me when I saw that and disliked her at that very moment. We eventually broke up for other reasons, but it's been over 20 years, and I have not forgotten that. Donde quiera que estés, quiero que sepas que James te he perdonado ni olvido semejante barbaridad. Answer. If it weren't for the age difference, I'd say we dated the same person. My ex mistreated her cat terribly, left all the caretaking tasks to me, and then got so mad when he obviously ended up liking me more. After I witnessed her slap him in the face, I gained the courage to move out and take him with me. I didn't realize she had been skipping his breakfast until I was taking care of him full time and he started gaining weight. That absolutely shattered my heart. He's still with me, and both of our lives are so much better without her. Story 22. When she called me and asked if I knew the emergency number for 911, me, 911, her, Yeah, that number you call if you have an emergency. Me. Yes, it's 911. Her. Yes, those people. I'm writing emergency numbers down so I have them if there's an emergency. I found the gas company, the electric company, everybody except for 911. Do you have their number? Me. I'll let you know if I run across it. Talk to you then. That was 30 years ago. She is probably still waiting for me to call her back. Story 23. She told me about a friend of hers who had a pet that was a crossbreed between a rabbit and a cat. I tried to explain that was impossible, but dropped the subject when I could tell she was going to start getting defensive. Guess she had never heard of Manx cats. Story 24. We were playing King's Cup, and the category was countries. He said Florida. We gave him another shot, then he said Miami. Asked him how far he thinks the drop is from the top to the bottom of Niagara Falls. He said 10 feet. We were right in front of the waterfall. He had a homework question that was literally 15 divided by 3. He was a pastry arts major, so the questions were easy, and he literally starts typing it into ChatGPT. I tell him to give it a try before he types it in, and he said he's 20. The only things he was able to talk about were drama or celebrities. Dinners would be pretty quiet, and whenever I try to talk about something other than him making fun of someone he didn't like, he wasn't able to keep it going. Took him to a Bernie Sanders rally, and 10 minutes away from the venue, he asked me who Bernie Sanders is. He said he's a political person, BTW. The list goes on, but TBH, the worst offense was the day after we split up, he hooked up with the 32-year-old gay mayor of his town, who was in a relationship at the time. Took me months to get over this guy, BTW. Story 25. He read some shoot life hack that suggested that if you microwave your iPod, iPhone, whatever, its battery gets supercharged and will last longer. So he microwaved his iPod Touch. We were long distance, communicating strictly through Messenger. I should have left when he couldn't contact me for 2 weeks due to his own stupidity. Story 26. He tried to convince me, an evolution and archaeology nerd, that humans originated in Anatolia. He was Turkish. Therefore, I believe this points to a nationalist streak. He also made a disgusted face when I mentioned a colleague and his partner, making it clear they are gay, which he obviously disapproved of. That was the second date and the last one. Story 27. He refused at length, despite me giving multiple concrete examples, to believe that there is a difference between volume and mass. He was European and couldn't wrap his mind around how a kilogram could be tied to the mass of a volume of 1 liter of water specifically and not other substances. Like, take one container, fixed volume, fill it with mercury, and then fill it with feathers, and you'll get 2 very different masses. Easy, right? No, wrong. Then he asked a male friend who just said they're different, and he believed him with no further questioning. Answer. OMG, you just reminded me of a conversation I had with a friend this summer. We were in Home Depot so I could buy garbage bags, and she commented that it was weird they're sold with liter measurements and not kilogram. Huh? How would they know how much weight I want to put in my garbage bags? She insisted you can measure containers with either volume or weight. They're equatable or some shoot. I was just naming things in the hardware store to try to make the point. That fluffy dog bed couldn't fit in this garbage bag, but that hammer could. She wasn't getting it. I think I started to get through to her when I found 2 identical candy containers that had different candy. One weighed more than the other, but the containers had the same volume. I think she only finally believed I wasn't crazy when we Googled it, and the internet gave us some story about a backpack full of lead and a backpack full of feathers. I am pissed that that was the only thing to convince her after I had given so many examples in the store, LOL. Story 28. He first blew his vehicle up by not checking or maintaining any fluids, knowing his car had a slow oil leak. He then decided to do his own maintenance on his new vehicle, overfilled it with oil, and did something to the engine that resulted in it being considered totaled by insurance. I let him drive my very old car for work, and he decided to leave it idling in the parking lot for hours at a time, resulting in it overheating and the cost to fix it being more than the car was worth. He did so many absolutely idiotic things in our 2 years of dating. Story 29. Rather than buy a new light bulb, he decided to test a light fitting with a multimeter to see if it was live. Spoiler alert, it was, and a 40p bulb would have saved much of what happened that day. The electric tripped, the light fitting exploded, and the multimeter in his hand caught fire. So off I went to buy a new light fitting whilst he got his electrician mate in to fix it. 9 hours later, the light fitting still didn't work, and the electrician was working by torchlight. Both were wondering why things still didn't work. I looked up at them both and asked, "When you last tripped the fuse box, did you reset it?" I laughed my jerk off at the look that my boyfriend and and the electrician gave as I walked off both had the same realization at the same time. I married him anyway, and now have a list of 100 ways in which my husband has tried to eliminate me by being a complete dumbass. There's fires, floods, putting sharp knives in precarious places, and of course the obligatory mixing electric with water multiple times. I asked him what goes through his mind when he is doing stuff he is definitely not qualified for, and he said, do. Story 30. He didn't understand what earthquakes are. We live in the Pacific Northwest, an earthquake zone. He was born here and lived here all his life. We're taught this shoot in school, plus he was an adult in '97 when we anticipated a catastrophic one. There is no way to not know this stuff unless he intentionally covered his ears and blocked out all the information. He thought the plates don't normally touch and that they crash together spontaneously sometimes, and that's an earthquake. I asked how he thinks that happens. How is that possible without a canyon opening up along the fault lines so the plates can back up and get a run at it? And what's powering it? Why does it happen? Why does it happen in some places and not others? No answers. Absolute vacancy. Then annoyance that I was asking these prodding questions. I didn't bother explaining how the literal world works to him. I broke up with him instead. I'd been getting more annoyed with him and planned to anyway, but that always sticks in my mind as being one of the final straws. He thought he was so smart and so superior to everyone, and the dumb fudge still doesn't know what earthquakes are. Story 31. My friends and I and my girlfriend were playing a game that requires us to name our favorite animals. Someone said rhinoceros, and my GF rebutted with it has to be a real animal. We all laughed until we came to the sudden realization she was serious. She was 27 and thought the rhino was in the same category as unicorns and griffins. Story 32. When he told me my body should be his to use as he wanted, when we wanted, including while I was asleep. When he told me let's fudge was seductive. When he told me about a woman he claimed was his friend, that his definition of a platonic friendship is someone who you only have intimacy with. It was a short relationship. Story 33. During the pandemic, he told me that smoking meth would keep you from getting COVID. I absolutely spent 2 weeks tending to him and his dumbass roommate when they got infected. Not for nothing, but I never got COVID, and I was the only one in this story who didn't smoke meth, so. Story 34. She was moving for school and found this totally perfect bachelor apartment near the school, and all she had to do was Western Union, 1 month's rent, as a deposit to a P.O. box, then somebody would mail her a key. I told her this was a scam, and she told me I had to back off and stop making her feel stupid. We broke up. Also, it was a scam, and she ended up going broke abroad and ended up sharing a bed with my other ex-girlfriend because she was always bi. Story 35. He didn't know how to put his head back in the shower to wash his hair. He would put his head bent forward under the water and suffocate and get soap in his eye. When I tried to tell him to put his head back, he almost fell backwards from it like a toddler. Story 36. We ate dinner at my family's house and were tasked with cleaning the table. I asked him to wipe up the crumbs so I could wipe down the table. He shuffles all the crumbs off the side of the table into his palm and then dumps his handful of crumbs onto the floor. Story 37. He claimed he was a history buff too, and that he had grown up on a farm. Great, I took him to a local, very famous historical house. I don't remember all the strange comments he made, but I do remember the one that broke my brain. As we were coming up on a couple of smaller vegetable garden areas, he smirked. And what are they growing here? He asked. Weeds? He added on. I just remember blinking because if he had grown up on a farm, this was farming 101. It's being left to fallow, I said, figuring that would be it. Nope. He proceeded to ask questions about what fallow meant, how the heck I knew that, and if I wouldn't like him because he wasn't as into history as much as me, despite previously telling me he was. I never went on another date with him after that. You can like other things. You can even not know things, but don't lie about it. Story 38. Maybe not an idiot, but certifiably crazy. We were visiting her mom, and my ex-GF and her mom were in a fight, screaming at each other over something her brother had done a week before. Her brother had died like 2 decades before. They were fighting over something they thought his ghost was doing. Story 39. When I was 24 and a teacher, I dated a 39-year-old man who still studied at university for nearly 14 years without any exams. He lived in a student dormitory. Don't get me wrong. I had never searched for a rich man, and if he had been 25, it would have been totally okay, but he was 39. I still liked him. Someday I had to pick him up with my car, and I confessed that it wasn't the cleanest at that time. There was an empty bottle and 2 letters on the back seat. The floor was a little bit dirty because it was fall and there were rainy days. So he opened the door, saw the mess, and said, "You seem to have lost control of your life." And he meant it. Later that day, we were getting intimate for the first time. He mentioned it again. "You seem to have lost control of your life." because my pants didn't match with my bra. I got up and left him without any explanation. Story 40. We didn't break up because of that right away, but soon after we kind of ran out of steam and split up. Years later, she went full MAGA QAnon cuckoo bananas. Looking back, the flat earth thing was a sign of things to come. Story 41. Out for a walk with Simon, who I'd been seeing for a few weeks. I pointed out a kestrel in a tree above us by a field's gate and stopped to watch it. Simon immediately began searching for something in the undergrowth. I asked what he was doing because I just wanted to watch the falcon quietly together. He said he was looking for a stone. He found a large piece of broken dry stone wall and hurled it into the field, telling me the kestrel will think the rock was prey and chase it, following the trajectory. My interest in Simple Simon had been withering anyway, but that idiocy decided it. I also hoped the rock didn't break the farmer's mowing machinery. Story 42. When she finally described what her dangerous allergic reaction to spicy foods entailed, tingly lips and a burning sensation on her tongue. She'd spent years insisting that no one was allowed to eat anything even mildly tangy in her presence for years. Story 43. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and I was just talking about how taking insulin sucks sometimes, and he told me to just stop eating carbs. It's a hormonal disorder, and you still need insulin in your body, not just to regulate glucose levels. This was when I was 18 and he was 24. We were together for a year. Story 44. When they would wash dishes and wouldn't rinse all the dish soap off because since soap eliminates germs, it's fine to ingest a bit of it. He also didn't believe me when I said you shouldn't be using antibiotics from prior prescriptions to treat a cold. Also wouldn't wear earplugs because he says he can't hear the music as well when he's right by the speaker at a club or concert. We didn't last long at all. Edit, didn't know it potentially could be a cultural thing about the dish soap, but I don't think it was in his case. His reasoning really was, if it eliminates germ, it's good for you. Answer, he also didn't believe me when I said you shouldn't be using antibiotics from prior prescriptions to treat a cold. We all know this already, but it bears repeating. Always finish the full antibiotics course and always return potential leftovers to the pharmacy. Not finishing the full course can lead to the illness coming back, but resistant to the antibiotics. Using antibiotics you're not prescribed can and will breed resistant bacteria. Using antibiotics for a viral infection does jack shoot. Most common colds are caused by virus and thus will be completely unaffected by antibiotics. Everyone but Vanilla Onion's ex, that is. Story 45. Not a proper date, but met another traveler who spent 2 hours trying to convince me the earth was flat. Every question I made to make him reflect came with another unexpected answer. Basically, the earth is flat, we are all under a glass dome, and the sun and moon don't exist. They're light bulbs. And of course, the powerful don't want us to know. Story 46. That moment happened during the trip, so I was stuck with him. But first he said, after buying groceries, how I should now pay for diner. Since he paid for groceries, I booked apartment for us for 3 nights and didn't ask to split money. After that day, I got fever, and he was an a-hole while I was shaking in bed. He tried sleeping and didn't care at all that I kept freezing and shaking, and he told me I should go into the cold shower and acted condescending. I barely slept that night and told him morning after I am sick and want to go home. He then offered to go to pharmacy to buy me paracetamol and told me, you can pay me back money, no worries, for paracetamol ROFL. What a jerk. While he was gone, I found Vaseline and creepy slutty outfits he bought for me apparently. Luckily, he didn't even show them to me. Anyway, we left 1.5 days earlier from a paid apartment, and a drive that should last 3 hours lasted 4.5 hours, as he is a terrible driver with no focus on road. I couldn't wait to come home as I was really sick. After that, he begged me to teach him how to behave because he didn't know. A 36-year-old guy, BTW. Story 47. He bought a block of cream cheese thinking it was a block of cheesecake because there was a picture of one on the front. Didn't believe me when I said they were different things. Smugly took a bite, then immediately spat it out and called me a bully and a jerk for letting him do it. Story 48. When she got angry over what I thought was funny, but she was being dead serious. She called her dad's car a Nissan Mazda, not a Nissan Maxima. When I corrected her, she argued with me and then Googled it, saw she was wrong, then got angry. Immediately realized she's thick as bricks. Story 49. When she started insisting I watch these YouTube videos explaining how Earth was seeded by aliens and there are lizard people hiding among us, controlling everything. When I said I wasn't interested in watching and asked her what proof there was that any of that was true, she referred me back to the YouTube videos as the proof. Awesome person and fun to be with, but I knew for sure at that point there was no future for us. Story 50. We went to a restaurant for dinner, And while studying the menu, he said incredulously, "Wow, does this place just do desserts?" I stared at him for a moment and then slowly reached out and flipped his menu over to the other side that had the main meals. It was at that point that I realized that I'd been putting up with a lot of really dumb shit because I was poor and he was paying for my meals. I felt quite shallow because I honestly thought I liked him, but in reality, I like being taken care of. But not that, Mom. Edit. A word. Story 51. When I started dating one of my exes, she stayed overnight for the first time. I had to work the next day, and she offered to drive me to work. Well, it was in the middle of winter with lots of snow. So in the morning, we were outside in the parking lot of my apartment complex, and she tried to unlock her car, but it wasn't working. She suggested the lock must have freezed overnight. I just stood there and repeatedly told her, just use the remote. But she ignored me and kept trying with her key. Finally, she tried the remote and another car unlocked. And she said, "Whoa, dude, I just unlocked a stranger's car." It wasn't a stranger's car. She tried to unlock the wrong fudge car for 15 minutes. She was pretty, though. Story 52. I dated this chick once. She drove a Jeep, wore Carhartt, and proudly proclaimed how she was into masculine things. Spoke many times about manual transmissions and how anyone who drove an automatic was a meanie. Well, it took a while, but eventually I was in this Jeep as a passenger. I shoot you. Not this chick is so insanely bad at it. She ran the engine at super high RPMs the whole time, and the vehicle would shudder like crazy with every shift because she dumped the clutch constantly. I actually broke up with her over that Jeep. It was so dirty. It had Tinkerbell stickers all over it. I felt like a dipshit being anywhere near it. Story 53. They honestly believed that an uncle of theirs had had his head severed, i.e. fully off, in a traffic accident, but doctors got to him in time and managed to sew it back on. It took a long jerk discussion, during which they got pretty offended that I would question the integrity of their relatives, before they began to understand why it might not be medically possible. In their defense, they'd apparently been told this as a child and never questioned it all the way to adulthood. So not so much an absolute idiot as deeply ingrained naivety. Story 54. After the second broken toaster needed replacing, it came to light that he was buttering his bread prior to toasting because he didn't like to do it when the bread was too hot. When I was like, "Hey, you could have burned down this house that I own," he hit me with "You don't always have to be so controlling." 1010. Story 55. One of my exes is a bisexual girl, and when we discussed politics, she casually told me, "But babe, I vote Italian far right-wing party." But darn, she was a master manipulator. Told me, "You're cute when you get mad." And the relationship lasted another month. Shame on me. Story 56. When she looked down upon me, wanting to spend my house deposit to buy in a regional city close to my work, rather than in the outer suburbs of the capital, which was a very long drive to work and so overpriced. She lived at home and had never owned a house herself. This was the first of many idiotic moments, though. I set her free and bought the house. 4 bedrooms and a huge backyard. Safe neighborhood. I also met a wonderful lady who moved in with me, and we are now married with 15 chickens and a furless cat. Life's pretty swell. Story 57. I tried to explain to him that diamonds don't have any intrinsic value and that they're only worth what people are willing to pay for them. Marketing has convinced us that diamonds are rare and thus are valuable. He couldn't understand that and refused to accept it. He had a STEM PhD, and I was working on and have since completed my humanities PhD at the time. Education is not the same thing as intelligence. Story 58. Her. What's on the east side of Florida? Me. What do you mean? Like cities or beaches? Her. No, I mean what's outside Florida? Me. Oh, water. Her. No, I mean what state? Me. Liquid. Her. Me. You good? Her. Yay, I was just wondering. Note, we lived in Florida. She was born and raised there. Story 59. My most recent ex wanted to make dinner. She tried to direct me to make the decision for her, but she eventually settled on one of those soup-in-a-bag situations. For background, I usually did all the cooking. I left the kitchen to let her at it while I had other shoot to do around the house. I came back in like 10 minutes to grab a beer and saw that she got my 8-quart Instant Pot out and boiled like 8 quarts of water and threw the soup mix in. I saw it and it looked pretty anemic as a soup. I looked at the instructions and saw her mistake. I asked if she followed the recipe. She said she did, to the letter. The instructions were, boil 8 cups of water, put mix in and boil for 20 minutes, and soup. I asked her why she used quarts instead of cups. She denied it and still said, I followed the instructions exactly. I pointed out that she was using 8 quarts of water rather than cups. She then said, I didn't know there was a difference between cups and quarts. She is like mid-30s. We had cup measuring things. We had the internet. I just was so dumbfounded. Like the lying and the incompetence. I couldn't believe it. Answer. I'm German and don't know much about cups, but as far as I know, there are different cups, right? Do the different cup sizes have their own names? As far as I can tell from a Google search, a cup 240 ml, what is a quart? 1 minute later. Now I've found an explanation. So she cooked the soup with 8 liters of water? How did she even get such a big pot? Story 60. One was convinced that sweat somehow got inside your head, and that's what caused headaches. Grown man BTW. One didn't know the days in a month, months of the year, and didn't think it was important to know either. One had no idea what a visa was, had never heard of it in his life. Grown man in the U.S. Navy, and had been to many countries with the Navy. Insane to witness. Same guy had no idea that schools were a thing in Arab countries, or that women were allowed to work. Despite knowing I grew up there, he just assumed I never went to school in my life. Propaganda is very effective. Story 61. I was dating this guy, retired military, current RN. You know, someone you would assume who had some common sense to rub together. Anywho, the outlet that ran his Wificable blew, and he had to have an electrician out. Meanwhile, his SN kid was freaking out about how he didn't have Wi-Fi, so of course he's freaking out about how long the electrician is taking. I'm like, why don't you just run an extension cord from across the room to plug in the router? Y'all, you would have thought that I had solved quantum physics the way this guy acted. Anyways, I should have ran then, cause this was just the first incident in a long line of me thinking how the fudge, how you made this long alive. Story 62. Was with him and a couple of my friends. The conversation tuned to Pokemon. He really liked Pokemon. I mentioned that it wasn't really my thing. He gets super confused since we had played one of the games together and told me that he thought I loved Pokemon. I had to explain to him that I like participating in his interests even if they're not my cup of tea. He then asked why anyone would do that. My friends had to yell at him, because she loves you, you idiot. And I realized he genuinely had no concept of empathy? I don't even know what to call this. He genuinely didn't understand that supporting your partner's interests is important. Anyway, last I had heard he was teaching his new girlfriend to play Pokemon, so I hope she's smart enough to figure him out sooner than I did El Mayo. Story 63. I was a vegetarian at the time when my boyfriend's, at the time, family brought home pepperoni pizza for dinner. Politely, I just said, it's okay, I can pick them off. To that, he responded, why would you need to do that? It's just tomato? His whole life, he thought pepperoni was tomato. While harmless, this was only one of many stories, unfortunately. Story 64. My wife made this post for fun, and we've been loving the answers. My dumbest moment was when I was 26 and told her reindeer aren't real, and my world was shattered. I thought they were mythical Christmas creatures, and the ones I saw at the zoo were fake, so kids would believe in Santa. Then a few months ago, I asked if the plant-based chicken wings were boneless. She told me plants don't have bones. I'm a moron, but in whimsical ways. I love her. Edit. Hers is, she hammered a screw into the wall. She's used power tools. Story 65. She mentioned she believes in banning abortion with exceptions for violation. She said this in Texas. She didn't sound mad that Texas ban has no exceptions. I asked her if it does to see if she knew whether or not the people, I just found out from that statement, she votes for did what she believes in or not. She got extremely quiet instantly, and I knew. She had no fudge clue whatsoever, despite voting for it and living under it for several years by this point. Story 66. Don't judge me too hard, but I gave 6 years to this idiot when he insisted UTI was only intimacy transmitted. And when I got it from a pool, he accused me of cheating for weeks. He also thought when women are in their periods, they only bleed in certain times, once or twice a day. He thought women used all those products because they didn't know when the daily bleeding would hit. So he insisted I didn't need to change that often all the time. And when intimacy ed people come, he would say, I know all of this, and sleep during the presentation. Also, we had biology class explaining periods, but he would argue with the teacher. Oh, I forgot to add one day as I was designing a system, he kept saying I was doing it wrong because Google Page said so. Page was a 2000s blog page, not even anything scientific. That design was my course project, and he fixed it for me, so I failed. And he just said if I listened to him, I would pass. Story 67. He asked me which animal pork came from. How have you lived 39 years and not questioned what you are eating when you have pork? The man lives in a penthouse in one of the most expensive cities in the U.S., but was the stupidest person I ever met. I should have gone into real estate. Story 68. He told me that before we started dating, he was offended that his best friend's girlfriend tried to set him up on a date with one of her ugly friends, and how relieved he was to be dating someone he finds really pretty. Once we started dating and he began showing his true colors, he would see me getting dressed up and angrily ask, "Who are you getting all pretty for?" Story 69. He looked honestly confused and said yes, and I had to explain to a 45-year-old man that that's not how it works. Also, he cooks chicken breast and vegetables but doesn't understand marinating or seasoning. Just think, if it comes from the store like that, then you shouldn't need to add anything, but doesn't understand why it doesn't taste as good. Story 70. When he was driving on wintry roads in the car ahead of me and my best friend, he was driving like a 17-year-old. He was mid-20s. Every corner he had to slide his car around. My friend and I sat quietly, and she just says to me, "Your boyfriend is an idiot." Not the most friend thing to say, but she also wasn't wrong. Story 71. In high school, my boyfriend at the time lost his Wii. I don't know how. A week later, my dad buys our family a Wii console, and I'm super excited. I tell my boyfriend, and he was silent for a while, then accuses my dad of stealing his Wii. He was an idiot in the first place for losing his console, but then thinks my dad drove an hour out of his way to steal something from him only to give to me for my BF to find. It was a bad relationship. The guy had massive mental issues that he refused to deal with. Story 72. Boils down to no intellectual curiosity and bizarre love bombing. And above all, just being adult. The love bombing was amusing at first, but I started to get weirded out by it. I was too polite to excuse myself out of the relationship. Was kind of desperate for a reason to bail. This dumbass threw a birthday party for himself and didn't invite me after his being in a relationship for 6 months. And was stupid enough to invite one of my close friends. That friend of mine asked about details for the party location and time. And there was my perfect excuse to exit. A few months later came a sob story and an offer of a very expensive steak dinner. I accepted the dinner and got top-shelf cocktails, and there was no intimacy, and I declined a future relationship despite lots of begging. Last I heard, he knocked up the next woman he met. Vomit. Answer. Almost sounds like you and I dated the same guy. Did yours by chance not understand what earthquakes are? Mine got upset. I wasn't at Thanksgiving dinner with his family after very clearly not inviting me. All his siblings had their partners, and he was all alone and felt bad about himself. I also have a feeling he's going to get the next woman he gets his hands on. Pregnant, even though he told me many times he disliked kids. Story 73. I texted my partner to let him know I was miscarrying, and he texted me back to say he couldn't come to the hospital because it would be gross. Then a couple weeks later, I broke up with him because I couldn't get that disrespect out of my head. He had a full-blown tantrum in the train station, him talking, smacking the floor, screaming, rolling on the floor, refusing to go home. Shoot was so wild, I still can't believe it happened. Story 74. Second or third date. Took her to a UK-themed pub. We were sitting at our table when she excused herself to use the bathroom. Came back 2 minutes later, red-faced and angry. I asked her what was wrong, and she said, "Stupid theme restaurants. They put some stupid funny theme signs on the bathroom doors, and you can't tell which is which." So I asked her what was written on the doors, and she responded, "They both say laddies, but one is only spelled with one D." I blinked and then gently said, "Ladies." "What?" she replied. "One door says laddies and the other says ladies." She immediately blushed with embarrassment, didn't say a word, just got up and returned to the bathrooms. Story 75. He shared a story about how he thought the simple act of frying bacon would impress the girl he was seeing. He overestimated his skills. Told me that cherry tomatoes and salads were too much work. Didn't know that pickles came from cucumbers. We were 28. Story 76. I did explain, "Masha Mahet didn't explain," but it was that question that made me consider the relationship. Story 77. 80-year-old dog peed on the hard floor. She grabs a Swiffer with the automatic spray on it. The pad was already yellow. She proceeded to hover the Swiffer over, spray the big jerk puddle for a few seconds, then mops the whole puddle through out the room, while barefoot. Story 78. We had just moved in together, and I made dinner for us every night. One night I went to a slightly later workout class than usual, and when I came home I realized he had made dinner for just himself, steak, tip salad, ate it all, and packed up the leftovers for himself for lunch tomorrow. I was upset. He told me he understood why I was upset, and that he would handle dinner for the two of us the very next night. Next night I come home from yoga or whatever, and dude is already tearing into some takeout. I asked what he ordered me. Why didn't he wait for me to start eating? We'll never know. And he said, and I quote, "broccoli." I thought he was kidding, but then he clarified that I could have some of his broccoli that came with his chicken lo mein, and that he in fact didn't order me anything because he said that I don't like Chinese because I'm a vegetarian. Story 79. Maybe not an absolute idiot, but she wasn't convinced we actually landed on the moon. If that's the case, why haven't we gone back there, etc.? She was also quiet for a bit after I explained that a chicken egg has to be fertilized for it to contain a chick. Very sweet girl, though. Story 80. I had a GF who couldn't remember what was left and what was right, 18-yo. So when driving her daddy's huge Audi Q7, she had to raise her hands to form the L with her thumb on the left hand. Then she knew what was left to turn left. The family considered me a genius because I knew basic physics or math stuff. And the world wasn't just a magical thing where stuff happened without reason, and I could calculate the change I would get after paying without a calculator. They were nice people, but too simple for my taste. Story 81. One for the UK folks here. I'm 49. My story takes place 20 years ago. I had a girlfriend at the time. We weren't, truth be told, very well suited, but we liked each other well enough and had a laugh together. She didn't really care for current affairs, culture, or history, whereas I always have. It was to this backdrop that my story unfolds. One day in 2005, she asked if I'd heard that Terry Wogan had been knighted. I had, and it seemed a nice thing all around. She expressed surprise that someone who wasn't British could be knighted. I was pleasantly surprised that she was interested enough to notice, and also that Sir Terry wasn't British, but from Ireland. I said something along the lines of, well, I think he can have an honorary knighthood, even though he's Irish. She looked quizzical. Oh, I thought he was American. My turn to look quizzical. She carried on, the wrestler, with the baldy mullet and the huge mustache, Hulk Hogan. Shed mistaken Terry Wogan for Hulk Hogan. At least they kind of rhymed. Story 82. When he left me to go back in the closet and move back in with his violently homophobic parents. Leaving me was one thing. I'd have been odd, but I'd been broken up with before. No big deal. He could have gone anywhere in the world, though. Done anything. Been anyone. I can only hope he learned quick how stupid that was and made an escape plan ASAP, but he'll never know. Story 83. I dated a chef briefly. Super nice guy, always friendly and smiling, cooked amazing dinners for us. One night, we got into a heated discussion about the Pledge of Allegiance. He was adamant that the word was not indivisible. It was invisible. One nation under God, invisible, with liberty and justice for all. Story 84. He was watching me do my physics homework. It was a multi-part question, so it had a B, C, D, etc. And he looked X over my shoulder and said, I think it's C. I just looked him confused and had to tell him it wasn't a multiple choice question. Leslie, he didn't read the paper or understand it. So why did he say anything at all? Story 85. I was really appreciative of him sticking around as I was developing bipolar disorder, not really minding my mood swings and craziness. After we broke up, I told him I was finally going to therapy. He asked why. Turns out he just thought all women are crazy, hyperventilate, and have manic episodes. Story 86. Among countless other times I realized it, when he worked himself into a panic thinking there was a possibility I might huff from his can of butane, he started emptying the entire can in our apartment kitchen. When it didn't empty fast enough through the nozzle for his tastes, he took a chef's knife and started sawing at the butane can to open it. As you might imagine, the can violently exploded in his hands while he was holding a knife. I'm amazed we never got a noise complaint or the police called once during the time we lived there. Story 87. After lending them a towel for the gym, they couldn't find it to get it back to me. Eventually, after several days, I said, are you sure it's not in your gym bag? Thinking, well, that's about the only place you're going to have put it, and it could be stuck at the bottom. And they said, oh yeah, I didn't think to look there. Story 88. When he tried to weaponize his half-blindness as a reason to not clean, because he apparently couldn't see the mess or would do a half job, but would then enthusiastically talk about learning to driving. It should also be noted that he used to do the whole why me about his blindness, but was later revealed that he caused it, but not managing his type 1 diabetes while consistently running his levels high and not doing injections and then wondering why he had seizures, DKA, nerve pain, and diabetic retinopathy. Story 89. He described himself as a writer. I asked if he felt comfortable sharing the plot of anything he had written. He proceeded to tell me the story of Beren and Luthien with changed names. I politely asked if he got some inspiration from Tolkien. He got offended. Story 90. I imagine that it was when, despite having 3 masters and a law degree, my girlfriend found out I had no clue how the theory of evolution works. Went to a rural public school in the Bible Belt South, and our teachers refused to teach it and skipped it completely. It somehow never came back up in the undergrad college days. She was shocked being from a New England state that ranks very high in public education quality. Story 91. Then had the gall to blame it on the prawns we had for dinner. The rest of us were fine. Story 92. My ex-fiancé asked me if I could help him with rent. I had asked if his job's paycheck along with his expenses was sustainable, and he had said yes. He had $21K in the bank from his father's life insurance, and he was all set up as far as I knew. Cue me asking him what the fudge he meant. All of the 21K was gone and he couldn't tell me where it went. Not only that, he claimed his paycheck wasn't covering all his expenses, so he needed help with his rent. I had been going to his apartment once a week to help him clean it and take care of his cats too. You know what? Maybe I was the idiot. Story 93. We saw the movie 12 Years a Slave. He didn't like the movie because no one helped the enslaved people. I had read the memoir, so not only did I emphasize that the violence was actually toned down to get an R rating, but also how did he think slavery worked? Was it an eye-opening moment where he reflected on the violent history of the U.S.? Nope, dude just kept saying that it was a bad movie that shouldn't have been made because it only makes people feel bad. Highly recommend the movie and watching it with a romantic partner and friends so you can all learn a bit about history and maybe plant substance out some idiots in the process. Story 94. He was flying home with a layover in Chicago. I told him that I'd never been to Illinois before. He insisted that he was going to Chicago, not Illinois. When I explained that Chicago is a city in the state of Illinois, his reply was, "Sorry, I'm not good at geology." Story 95. He said that it was okay to drive while so exhausted you were falling asleep because the body needs sleep, so it's a natural thing. But it's not okay to drive tipsy because drinking is not a need. Shortly after we broke up, he wrecked his car, falling asleep at the wheel. Story 96. My wife and I fought. It was a nasty fight, and I have no clue what it was about now. Anyways, she apologized later by giving me a kid's book about a teddy bear who wants to say sorry but doesn't know how. We didn't have kids at the time. As a man, I believe what I experienced is called the ick. We're divorced now, but that's more because she was fudge another man. If she ever apologizes again, I'm curious what kid's book she'll give me to express herself. Story 97. When he said with his whole chest that Chicago is not a Midwest city, mind you, he's never been to Chicago or even spent more than 5 days in any part of the Midwest. While I've lived in Chicago for nearly 20 years, he was adamant I had no leg to stand on for this debate. Story 98. I took her to the movies with some friends who had never met her. Later, one friend pulled me aside and told me, the intimacy must be really good. I asked her why she said that, and she replied, because every time she opens her mouth, you roll your eyes. I mean, I knew she was kind of a dim bulb, but that really put it in perspective. Story 99. We are both European, and she agreed on visiting my sister, who was at the time staying in the USA for a few months for her job. She asked me in front of a few friends if we were going by train. She's the most kind-hearted and loyal woman I ever dated, but her general knowledge is seriously lacking. Story 100. When she told me whales are fish, and I asked what are dolphins, and she said fish, and I asked what about bones, and she said animals, and I asked if she'd heard of mammals, and she asked like bears, and I asked, do you know the definition of a mammal? And I found out she was an idiot. Story 101. I came home one day, and he had decided he wanted to refinish our coffee table by spreading wood stain with his bare hands all over it. Apparently, he forgot gloves or a brush and just went for it. There was wood stain everywhere, all over the floors, door handles, light switches, walls. The table looked horrible, and he had stain on his hands for days. When I expressed being upset, he doubled down and got mad at me, saying I was being a meanie, and he was just trying to improve our house. I dated this guy way longer than I should have after that. Story 102. She had a convection oven that she called a microwave and regularly put metal in it. I told her that can't be a microwave because you can't put metal in microwaves, and she gave me the most intense eye roll. Then she put metal in my microwave, and the food caught on fire. Story 103. Gave himself food poisoning because he microwaved frozen chicken wings. They were uncooked Tyson buffalo wings. I told him they needed to go in the oven. He refused to believe me and refused to read the package. He ate raw, hot chicken and later had diarrhea for hours and hours. Story 104. Watching TV with a girl. Random Dirty Jobs episode on Discovery Channel. Mike was welding something. I can't fully remember. She was sitting there covering her eyes watching TV. I was like, hey, what are you doing? You're not supposed to watch people weld. You should really cover your eyes, you know? You didn't last long. Story 105. Ex of mine came home one day in a shambles and has to tell me about what happened to her friend since I too was also looking to buy a new vehicle. I only had a few grand, so I needed a clunkers someone was selling on the side of the road. They did as well, however, with their 5K thought they had the deal of a century. Apparently on eBay, someone was selling a brand new car. This was in maybe 2012. So the eBay thing said something like 2012, new car 5K will ship. She came and told me they sent the money to buy the car. I immediately started laughing And she is fudge furious, crying, "What's so funny about that? That's all the money they had? Were they just supposed to pass on it?" I said, "Yeah, it's obviously a fudge scam. On what planet would someone sell a brand new car for 20K under the value on eBay?" Then she said, "Yeah, and what if that happened to you? Would you still be laughing, you jerk?" I said, "No, but I also wouldn't ever do something like that because I'm not a moron. You'd think between the two of them or one of your coworkers, you would have at least brought up it might be a scam." Nope. Not one fudge person told them it was a bad idea. Everyone told them to jump on the opportunity. She gets more mad and says, because that is all the money they had, and they don't have a car, they might need to stay with us, and I would have to deal with it because I am the jerk who found it funny. I said, of course, absolutely not. They won't even be staying one night since clearly they are terrible with money. We can't afford to support them and cart them around. She doubled down on me being a jerk, and we broke up shortly after. Good riddance. There are other stories of her and her idiot friends getting scammed, but that one was the best of all them. Story 106. We were trying to figure out a fair way to split financial obligations. I made quite a bit more than her, so I suggested we do it as a ratio relative to our take-home pay, not counting money she got for child support, since that was for her child. She couldn't grasp the concept at all. It would have been something like her 65 me. Story 107. They used to leave this back sliding door open all light so their cats could get in and out in Hawaii, where outdoor cats are decimating local birds. I asked several times if it was really safe, and they were like, of course, we're on a military base. It's super safe here. Yeah, we got robbed. Story 108. She bought a horse for $250, spent a day driving a 2-hour round trip to get it, fed the horse and worked with it for about a month, got it a little more rideable. Sold it for $300, was happy with her decision because she made $50. No combination of words was effective to explain that she ultimately lost money due to the gas required to get the horse home or the hay grain the horse ate because that doesn't count. Story 109. On the day she tested positive for COVID, she insisted on going around to several restaurants without a mask as if nothing were different. And this was in the early days when COVID was really dangerous. The definition of a super spreader, and she didn't care at all. Story 110. Two separate exes, similar incidents. First, one thought Italians were Latin American because he thought Italy was located in South America. He was himself Hispanic. Second one was 8 years my senior. I was 18, so that should tell you something. Who got into a heated argument with me about Mexico. He thought Mexico was a part of South America and did not take kindly to me informing him otherwise. We live in the USA, so these not like fun trivia questions. We literally border Mexico. Story 111. We watched 22 Jump Street, and there's that scene where the professor, Patton Oswalt, goes on a rant and says, I have tenure, I can do whatever I want. Well, a week or so later, we're debating something about pursuing higher education, and he says, it's not like they hold teachers accountable.